We started Positive Money in May 2010 because it became apparent that the journalists and the authorities didn't have a clue what was going on with regards to money. So what's the big issue with money? Well, there's three key questions that we need to be asking about the way the system currently works. First one is, who creates money? Secondly, how much money do they create? And then thirdly, what do they do with the money that they create? Where do they put it? So we're going to go through these over the next hour. Okay, so firstly, who creates money? Now, the reason why this is so important is because there's a real conflict of interest. If you have the authority or the power to create money, and your name happens to be Gordon Brown, and you're trying to win an election, you have such a temptation to create money to pay for anything that you think will win you some votes. And you might sort of follow the policies of this guy, Mr. Robert Mugabe, and I think most people will know what has happened there from just endless money printing by the government because they have this conflict of interest where they're actually benefiting from being able to create money. So it's really important that we know who creates money now and whether they have this conflict of interest. Well, where we are today, obviously, I mean, everybody knows these are created by the Bank of England, by the government. It says on there, the clues on the note. But actually, this type of money now only makes up 3% of all the money in the economy. So what's the rest of it? The other 97% is just numbers in a computer system, nothing else. So where did this other 97% of all the money come from? Well, this is Martin Wolf, the chief economics editor of the Financial Times. The essence of the contemporary monetary system is the creation of money out of nothing by private banks, often foolish lending. You couldn't really sum it up any more succinctly. Creation of money out of nothing by private banks, often foolish lending. Okay. Some people aren't totally convinced by this. So we have some quotes from the Bank of England. The money creating sector in the United Kingdom consists of resident banks, including the Bank of England, and building societies. Money creating sector? I mean, most people know that if you try and print your own 10 or 20 pound notes at home, the police are going to come through your door at 2 a.m. the next morning. So how come there's this money creating sector that includes banks and building societies? Well, I'm not going to go through all the specific details of how that works because it'll take an hour and a half to go through it, and most people get confused. If you do want to know exactly how it works, the best material I can recommend is this book here, Where Does Money Come From?, which is available outside. It's been worked on by the New Economics Foundation, Josh down here, and a colleague of mine at Positive Money, Andrew Jackson. And I think Josh will talk more about this. But what I'm going to show you is incontrovertible proof that this is the way the system works for anybody who's at all skeptical or doubting whether it really is. And it's hard to believe, but here we go. When banks make loans, they create additional bank deposits for those that have borrowed the money. Okay. Paul Tucker, the second in command at the Bank of England. Banks make loans by simply increasing the borrowing customer's current account. That is, banks make loans by creating money. By far, the largest role in creating broad money is played by the banking sector. When banks make loans, they create additional deposits for those that have borrowed the money. The banking sector plays such an important role in the creation of money. Changes in the terms for deposits will affect the demand for money, while changes in the terms for loans will affect the amount of bank lending and hence money supply. I want to show these basically just to confirm that this is exactly how the way it works. We had an award-winning journalist the other day accuse us of being ignorant because we don't know how the system works. But these days, I just say, look, I'm not going to argue with you. You can go and argue with the Bank of England. In case you were wondering whether it's just in the UK, this is from the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. The actual process of money creation takes place primarily in banks. Each and every time a bank makes a new loan, new bank credit is created, new deposits, brand new money. Graham Towers, the former governor of the Central Bank of Canada. In the Euro system, money is primarily created through the extension of bank credit. The commercial banks can create money themselves. Okay, so anybody still doubtful? Well, if you were still doubtful, here's a letter from the Bank of England that one of our supporters wrote in with some questions. He said, when a commercial bank makes a loan to a borrower, does the commercial bank in effect create new money? In other words, when a bank makes a loan to a borrower, is that money just created out of thin air? And they just responded, when banks make loans, commercial banks do indeed create much of the money in the economy. So effectively, we have almost a fully privatized money system where all the money that we are using is created by private banks out of nothing when they make loans. And this is less than 1% of the population actually understand this. And probably less than, well, we have 4 MPs who understand it. What's 4 as a percentage of 650? It's small, yeah. It's less than 1%. Okay, excellent. So this, in Where Does Money Come From? This is Professor Charles Goodhart. Any professional economist will know that Charles Goodhart is one of the sort of the authorities on central banking in the UK. He's been writing the textbooks for about 40 years. And he wrote the foreword for this book. He said, at a time when we face up to massive challenges in financial reform and regulation, it is essential to have a proper, good understanding of how the monetary system works in order to reach a better alternative. Well, the authorities don't understand how it works. MPs don't understand how it works. Most of the public don't understand it. Journalists don't understand it. Stephanie Flanders was on the BBC the other day saying that only the Bank of England can create money, which is just factually untrue. And even people at the Treasury don't fully understand this. We get letters from the Treasury saying banks can't create money. It's like, have you guys spoken to the Bank of England recently? So this is where we are. Very few people understand this. Banks create money. All the evidence is there. It's not a conspiracy. It's just fact. It's just the way it works. So how much money do they create? Okay. Well, the key question here should be who decides? Who decides how much money they're going to create? If you walk into a bank tomorrow and ask for a loan, you're going to have to discuss this with a mortgage advisor or one of the bank tellers who are going to help you see if you can actually afford that loan. So these guys at the bottom are deciding whether to make loans to people. And every bank loan creates new money. So these people are actually deciding whether to create money. They probably don't know it because most people at the bottom of a bank won't really understand the way the system works. And let's look at the incentives that these guys have. So, you're working in the bank, you're on a fairly modest salary, but you also get bonuses for every loan that you make. You get a commission. That's your incentive. So you have this decision when you're working in the bank. Either you lend or you don't lend. Okay. And if you lend, you can get a commission. You get that bonus at the end of the year if you've hit all your targets. You get to keep your job. And you have this opportunity of getting promoted if you're performing well. If you don't lend, well, there's absolutely no benefit. There's no rewards for bankers that don't lend. And if you consistently don't lend, then you get fired. So when the incentives stack up like that, what are you going to do? You're going to lend. Okay. So when somebody comes in asking for £1 million mortgage on a house that they can barely afford, but you know that you're going to get potentially a 10 grand bonus for actually sealing the deal on that mortgage, then your incentive is to lend them the money. You're not going to worry about the money supply of the economy or the bigger economic issues. So basically these guys are making loans without really understanding that every loan they make creates new money. And not only that, they've got these massive incentives that are encouraging them to always lend if possible. And those incentives overrule the actual, the risk management and the prudence of bank lending. So, this sales culture is really, in terms of where it impacts on money, it means our money supply is just going to expand and expand because the incentives are there to push those people to create more and more money. These corporations are creating money, and it's systematically set up so that they're always going to try and inflate the money supply and create as much as possible. The guys at the top, they maybe understand that it is creating money, but they don't ever consider the impact that will have on the economy. And when you look at banks the size of RBS, HBOS relative to the UK economy, the fact that they don't consider their impact on the economy and how that might feed back, that's scary. So how much money have they actually created? Well, the cash, physical cash, currently adds up to about £57 billion. Which, to put it into perspective, is about 19 Richard Bransons, or enough to buy 351,000 houses. The electronic money that the banks create, there we go. And this is perfectly to scale. 2,200 billion pounds, which is 733 Richard Branson's 13.5 million houses. To put that last number in perspective, it's basically enough money to buy half of all the houses in the UK. There's only about 22 million houses in the UK. And you can break this down by year as well. This is all from Bank of England figures. So in the 90s, they were creating an average of about 40 to 50 billion pounds of new money every single year. And then in 2000 onwards, it started to increase. We got 68, 66, 98 billion pounds of new money pumped into the system in 2004. And then it really gets out of control. And this is your house price bubble. This is why houses were getting more expensive. And then we had the credit crunch, and they stopped creating new money. Because we were so dependent on debt by that point, that's when the economy really started to grind to a halt. Put this into perspective, in 2006, 171 billion pounds of new money created, adds up to about 3,800 per adult in the UK. Again, Professor Charles Goodhart, the supply of money is actually determined primarily by the demand of borrowers to take out loans. So if we're willing to keep taking on the debt, then the money supply will expand. And if you have banks with incentives, as we've seen, then the money supply will expand. We would add one other thing to that statement, which is that it also depends on how confident the banks are. If they're confident that the economy is going to be good, they'll keep lending. If they're panicking, then they'll refuse to lend.